wonder why Iran doesn't trust us. Wasn't it the West that installed Teacock? Teacock drone?
Is it set?
Yeah.
So we can start?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, first off, I think we discussed a lot last week about how Mr. and Mrs. LaRouche for over 40 years have been leading successfully a war against the British Empire and the corrupt system that is responsible for mass murder. And at one point last week, I recited or I read the Cranes of Ibycus by Friedrich Schiller, which is a poem about the Arrhenius principle, the principle of the Furies or Eumenides, that of the divine justice that Ibycus the poet, as he was murdered, he called upon the Cranes to avenge his death. And through the action of natural law, the perpetrators exposed themselves and then were brought to justice. And we're now in a similar situation. I mean, if you consider what has occurred just in the last couple of weeks, you had the citizens of the British Empire decide they want to, or the United Kingdom under the British Empire decide they want to leave the European Union, despite all the coercion and bribes and pressure and Obama's warning. You have the ensuing collapse of the system that has accelerated since then. You've had the exposure. We forced the release of the 28 pages of the 9/11 Commission report. We have Hong Kong, Shanghai bank executives being arrested for their evil deeds. Unfortunately, they were arrested by U.S. federal authorities, so who knows? They may get off on that one. But the fact is, the more American expression for this is the chickens are coming home to roost. So I want to refer, first of all, to how late last month, we had a conference in Berlin. And the keynote address by Mrs. LaRouche was that mankind can have a beautiful future provided we don't suffer the fate of the dinosaurs. And she referred to this Arrhenius principle. At that conference, with presentations from many countries, I believe it was 24 perhaps, well, 24 countries were represented in this conference. It elaborated the kind of projects and the kind of thinking that's required to implement a new system. And there were several presentations about projects in Syria, activities in Africa, and the One Belt, One Road project with the Chinese. This is what the future is going to look like, provided that we can complete this current phase of warfare, continue the process that is ongoing, exemplified by the release of the 28 pages. But in order to do that, we've got to have a deeper understanding. We've got to make sure we have a deeper understanding of the principles operating in this warfare. In other words, what is the method by which LaRouche has been able to lead this fight? For example, how did he identify that the most crucial intervention at this point would be to organize, in effect, a bailout of Deutsche Bank as the basis for reorganizing Deutsche Bank around the principles of its chairman, Alfred Herrhausen, who was assassinated in 1989, weeks after the Berlin Wall came down, a few days before he was to give an address in New York City to outline actions that he identified as necessary, which were essentially the same as those LaRouche had been calling for. For that matter, what is the method of thinking that enabled LaRouche to forecast in the middle of his campaign in 1988 that the Berlin Wall was soon to be taken down, Germany would be reunified, and we should begin economic reconstruction of the East, starting with Poland, just as Herrhausen said a year later, before he was killed. In LaRouche's televised presidential addresses when he ran for president in '84 and '88, he talked about plans for developing what we called the third world, the underdeveloped countries. Herrhausen, in his speech he was going to give, called for debt relief, debt forgiveness for these nations that had already paid their debts many times over. How was it that LaRouche could identify the policy that was necessary to overturn mutually assured destruction? The policy that came to be known as the Strategic Defense Initiative, that was adopted by the Reagan administration, or at least parts of the Reagan administration. The policy offered to share with the technology to make missiles obsolete with the Soviet Union. And how was LaRouche able to forecast that if the Soviets rejected the proposal, that their economy would collapse? The first phase of which was the collapse of the East German system and the coming down of the wall and all of that. It would seem to be appropriate for us to figure out how to think like LaRouche. Now, I have to tell you, I've been working on it for 33, 34, 35 years. So I don't know. I'll do my best to give you some help in that regard. I haven't got there yet, but you have to keep working.
Or divine intervention.
Yeah, right. Look, I mean, I went through LaRouche's 4 cardinal laws that he had enunciated in 2014 as absolutely necessary, not an option, but immediate necessity to halt the collapse into complete economic disintegration and nuclear war. All of those things are on the table. Economic collapse, nuclear war. But as I said, with these recent victories, I probably left some of them out. Indicates where we're going. If you follow from the beginning of the BRICS, you know, up in the successful intervention of Putin in Syria and the other developments that I spoke to you of, the progress of the One Belt, One Road project and the vast number of economic cooperation deals that are coming together. We have a potential. We have a bright future. So let's make sure we're not dinosaurs. Now, dinosaurs went extinct, what, 65 million years ago? And there's a lot of theories as to why they went extinct. I guess I like anthropomorphism. So rather than going into the details of why the dinosaurs went extinct, let's just summarize by saying that they screwed up. So we should make sure we don't screw up and become extinct. Now, one of the first concept that I'm going to deal with today, and then afterwards we can have a Q&A discussion and maybe bring up some more details of some developments that have occurred. I want to deal with this fundamental concept of the rate of increase of potential relative population density. This is a fundamental idea. Now, I mentioned that about LaRouche in '89, he forecast the Soviet Union was going to come apart. Now, he forecast that, was it 83, 84, and their system started to come apart in '89. And where was LaRouche when the Berlin Wall came down? He had been put in prison. He was put in prison by the forces of this empire. So he was in jail for 5 years. When this is literally the week that George H.W. Bush was inaugurated president. Now, he came out of jail about a year after Bill Clinton was inaugurated. Some of us were there for that first conference, that national conference that he held, keynoted in 1994. It's in Washington. And it was LaRouche and some of his associates, Helga, a couple of security people, and about 6 or 7 Russians. Now, I want you to think about that. All these Russians there to welcome LaRouche back from prison. Now, these were mostly scientists. Now, one scientist, I don't believe he was there, but this one scientist named Boris Kuznetsov, he hosted LaRouche's visits to the Russia that occurred soon after this conference. And as Kevin pointed out, think about that. The man is out of prison but on parole, and yet he's traveling to Russia on a regular basis to meet with Russian scientists. How does that happen? I'll let you think about that.
Were the label communists?
Hmm?
They were the label communists?
Oh, no, we're worried about communism at that point. But here's the thing. This Russian scientist, I read up on him, Kuznetsov. Unfortunately, he's passed away. The listing was that he was an environmental scientist. What does that mean? That means he was one of the scientists that worked on creating the environments inside of spaceships for the cosmonauts, among other things. So that's what environmental science means in Russia, as opposed to what it means here. What it means here is you basically providing justification for killing dark-skinned people.
It's a contradiction in terms, environmentalism and science.
Exactly. All right. The reason I bring up Kuznetsov is that he said that the unit of potential relative population density, this fundamental scientific concept, and it should be known henceforth as the LaRouche. And what do I mean? Like, you measure voltage in an electrical circuits in terms of volts. What's volts? It's electrical potential. It's named after Volta, the amount of power that a electrical generator can transmit is called a watt, named after James Watt. The amount of current in an electrical circuit is named an ampere or an amp. You get the idea. Oh, my favorite. The unit of magnetic field strength is a Gauss. Okay, so potential relative population density. That's a LaRouche. And we have to make sure that that name sticks. But we got to teach people what it means. Now, first of all, it's a measurement of human progress. Now, first, let's look at the idea of population density. That's pretty straightforward. How many people per square kilometer or square mile? Now, I'll come back to this later, but it's interesting. If you look at a chart that shows you population densities of various countries, it does some very interesting things. Because I know that when I was a young person and going to college, etc., it was being drummed into my head, and I'm sure it's even worse now, that there's too many people in the world. And definitely too many people in Africa. Mm. And that's completely insane. It's criminal to promote that idea. Well, anyway, let me get back to that. All right. How many people per square kilometer? Now, in LaRouche's book, So You Wish to Learn About Economics, he talks about, and other locations, he said that if mankind is operating at a level of basically no technology, in effect, as a baboon, who depends on his subsistence in gathering berries and roots and whatever vegetation he can, or otherwise chasing down animals to kill and eat, that the maximum amount of people that could be sustained by that kind of technology, which is no technology, would be about 10 million people. Now, does that make sense? Because it's a vast amount of area that would be required to provide the food for that for people, if that's your mode of operation. Okay, so 10 million, and it doesn't matter if it's exact. The main thing is the concept. Now, of course, the population in the world now is about 7 billion. So that is many orders of magnitude greater than 10 million. And what accounts for that difference? Knowledge, science, technology. Mankind's history has been a series of breakthroughs, discoveries of physical principles and biological principles that, when applied to human activity, increase his ability to control nature. Not completely, but to increase his capacity. And, for example, to produce more food, the development of agriculture, for example, to produce a lot more food. You can figure out that, hey, maybe instead of chasing these animals, I should get them to stick around and wait for me to milk them and then kill them so I can eat them. These are technological revolutions. Yeah. Or to figure out how to select out the big animals that are going to just stick around and chew on the grass rather than the ones that are going to give you a hard time. This is enabled mankind's population density to increase. So that's first rough estimate. Talk about that. Now, but the idea here is potential relative population density. So it's clear about the population density. Now, what about relative? Relative because not all land is of the same quality. It's different if you're in the tropics, or you're in the desert, or if you're in, say, Iceland. Different climate. There's also a relative quality of depletion or enhancement of the land for productivity. The black soil of Ukraine is very good for growing crops. So it's a relative quality. The technology isn't relative to the condition of the land, but yet the number of people that you can support is relative to that. But ultimately, it's a function of the technology that you can apply to the living process. Now, I remember a quote which struck me as a bit racist at the time, but it's relevant to this, and maybe I can look it up for next time. It just occurred to me about an hour ago, so I don't have my book. I was reading, about 20 years ago, I read this biography of William Tecumseh Sherman. And he was talking about land out west after the Civil War, and he said that it was a waste that this territory that he was in, I think it might have been, well, it was west of Kansas, I know that the land that it would take to support one Native American could support 20, well, he said white men, but that's the way he put it. I mean, he wasn't a complete racist. He is the one that issued that Special Order 15 to give 400,000 acres of land to freed slaves in the South. I think mainly he did it to punish the Southerners that rebelled against the Union, but he did issue that order, although it was reversed by that jerk, Andrew Johnson, after Lincoln had authorized it, but Sherman did it. But the point is, the level of technology of the Native American out there could only support, relative to the U.S. Developed technology, 1 to 20. But again, one more concept we have to get here. It's the potential relative population density. Like, what is the potential? Because as we all know, and this is the real issue, the real political issue before us, is that there's a difference between the actual population density because of the technology that is applied, that is used in a given land area, and what it could be. That's the whole point. If we use the technology that exists to support human life in a particular area, how many people could you support? So this is a measure of technology. It's a measure of development. And as we will get into, it's not just a measure of machinery. It's also a measure of a quality of human mind. And I think it's very, very just and poetical that the key to economics, the key to the successful method of LaRouche in economic forecasting and economic strategy and planning is people, human beings. Now, I recall somewhere in one of LaRouche's writings in the 1980s, he had estimated that very easily the world at that time could support a population of 25 billion people living at a standard of living that prevailed in Western Europe and the United States around 1975. 25 billion. So that's more than 3 times the population that we're at now. And we have made some technological advances since 1980. Not the ones we needed to, but think about that. 25 billion people at the higher standard of living that most people had in the 70s. Now, there was one of our members translated a paper by the Russian scientist, back to Russian science again, Vladimir Vernadsky. He wrote this paper about scientific thought, published in 1938. And in this paper, he quotes a German scientist who had an estimate of how many people could be supported on the earth using, well, he referred to the energy throughput from the sun, how much food you could grow. Basically had a figure of 150 people per kilometer all over the earth. It was something like 22 billion that he got. And this was from the 1970s. But he said that doesn't take into account the utilization of other forms of energy. His estimate for the carrying capacity of the potential population of the earth was 30 quadrillion people.
At that point, it could get kind of cramped.
It might get cramped, but
30 quadrillion.
excuse me.
That's a lot of people.
Now, hopefully, way before then, we would start colonizing planets and so forth. But obviously, there's a lot of room for growth and progress. Now, after he quotes Nikolai, Nikolai's writing 1917, 1919. Vernadsky says, yeah, that was 20 years ago. Now, he's not even thinking about the technology we have now or are going to develop, i.e. the utilization of the energy of the atomic nucleus. Okay, so that's 1938. So what is that? That's almost, what, 90 years ago? 80 years ago?
80 years ago.
Yeah, okay. So we don't know how many people we can support, but we know that the technology that you utilize, the science, the ideas that your population has mastered, if it's applied, could increase the number of people that you can support per square mile, per square kilometer, et cetera. So this LaRouche identified as a fundamental idea for economic measurement. But he also insisted it's not simply a question of the potential relative population density. The issue is the rate of increase of the potential relative population density. In other words, progress, improvement. I mean, it's natural for people to think that their children and grandchildren should have it better than them. Well, I mean, this obviously, if you refer to all these other people before LaRouche, this is not a new concept, but LaRouche made it very scientifically quantifiable. And this is essential to his economic forecasting method. Now, before I go on, let's read you some figures here. Anybody have any idea what the population density of the United States is?
60 per square mile.
60 per square mile? I remember when I first was reading what LaRouche was writing, I mean, it's very intense, all the brainwashing about overpopulation. And then they show you pictures of starving children in Africa. But then you realize when you investigate, you find out that these countries where these people are starving, they have almost no population density. It's insane. I'll just give you an example. Chad, population density per square mile is 8. Gabon, 5. Niger, where all the non-existent yellow cake uranium was that Saddam was trying to get, 10. Mali, 10. Algeria, 14. Now contrast that to 3 significant countries in Africa that have some development. Now Nigeria has oil and 100 million people, but their population density is 151. Okay. Now remember the presentation from the Berlin conference where this woman who works in nuclear technology where she used to work at the International Atomic Energy Agency. She said that only 55% of the population of Nigeria actually had electricity, even though they've got tons of oil. All right. South Africa, population density, 94 per square mile. That was a country that was developed because it was developed by European colonists. Right. This is also one of the countries that is being targeted to prevent them from developing their nuclear technology. I mean, they have, I think, they have one nuclear power plant. They don't want them to use it. Egypt, 82. The rest of Africa, I mean, I didn't look at every country, but you see those miserable figures that correspond to general collapse, destruction. Okay.
India.
And I remember,
Or India or China.
I'll get to that. I'm going to go through the BRICS list. Okay. But the most important thing is the potential. Now remember, what did Modi say was the most important resource of India?
People.
Well, he was specific. Didn't he say 600, was it 600 million people under the age of 35?
Right.
Or Indians under the age of 30. That's their biggest resource. Now, Americans used to think that way. We have to go back to that. All right, so let's look at the BRICS countries. Russia. What do you think the population density of Russia is?
It's
Small.
Maybe
22.
22.
Wow.
Population density of Brazil. Quite a coincidence. 22.
Okay. Because you get the whole Amazon area is almost unpopulated. Well, Siberia is almost unpopulated. So it's all concentrated populations, but the territory.
Right. Exactly. Okay. Now we get to some serious points. What is the population density of China?
10.
It's significant. Remember, it's a 5,000-year-old civilization.
No, okay.
200.
142 per square mile. It's lots of room.
Yeah.
And when I get to some of these other ones, you'll see there's lots of room for development. Okay, India, 386. That's another very old civilization with a lot of potential. Okay, and I mentioned South Africa, 94. Okay, United States, 84. Yeah, I remember 1981 traveling across country with my father in a car. This place is not overpopulated. There's nothing between basically Chicago and Los Angeles.
I happen to know one state, North Dakota, has a population density of 7 per square mile.
Is that sheep or people?
That's people.
Okay, if you couldn't hear, one person here said North Dakota has 7 people per square mile. North Dakota. I don't think I went there. But I went through Utah. Dirt, salt.
It's deserted.
Yeah, Texas. Yeah, we went through Texas. There was hardly anybody there. You have to go to the city, and then otherwise there's nobody there. Nevada, nothing. Even with all the gambling and all that, still nothing. Okay, but I think you should get the point. Oh, this really makes the point how underpopulated the world is. Okay, because Japan, what's their population density? 339.
Wow.
That's all.
Wow.
Germany, 235.
Did you? Yeah, I was going to ask for Belgium and Austria.
Oh, I remember. Yeah, people like to talk
Those are so
about that.
evident.
Okay, listen to this. United Kingdom, 650.
Wow.
So what would the population of the United States be if we had 650 people per square mile?
That definitely sounds overpopulated.
Okay, now here's the one that's just like it makes you laugh. Canada.
One.
I said 4.
3.
3.
Pretty close. 3 people per square kilometer in Canada.
I did say 2.
That's because there's only like 30 million people there, and they all live like within 10 miles of the border of the United States.
Where it's not
Well,
frozen.
maybe 100. Yeah. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of snow and ice, but hey, still. And then Australia, a whole continent,
Wow.
Yeah, right.
2.
Wow. That's
It's not
ridiculous.
So your problem is not overcrowding. So the measure of progress is the increase of the rate of increase, rather, of potential relative population density. Yes. So that's what knowledge can you apply to human practice to support human life? Like I said, I think that's a just natural idea for measuring the progress of human activity. Now, if you have a credit system, you have a monetary system that serves that purpose, that's just. And that's what the American system of political economy was based on. Now, the alternative monetary system, well, I mean, we could say it's the British system, but it goes back way beyond Britain. You can go back to the Dutch, you can go to the Venetians, Roman Empire. The monetary system is different. But essentially, any empire, the ultimate basis of an imperial economy is stealing. You steal resources, you steal labor. The stealing of labor is otherwise known as slavery. Or if you're clever about it, you sharecropping. Or, paying people a miserable wage just so they can have the privilege of enough food to survive the next day to do it again. That's the basis of the monetary system, is stealing. Because ultimately it's backed up by military force. Whoever can take whatever they want. Now that doesn't work. I mean, ultimately it collapses. Now we're going to talk about why it ultimately collapses. And it also makes a more fundamental point about population, because many people will say to you, well, okay, I like people and all, but why do we need more? Why is that a measure of progress? But you should point out to people who say there's too many people, that, well, who should we get rid of then?
Yeah.
Start with your family.
Hmm?
Start with your family.
Yeah, we'll make them think about that.
Mm-hmm.
Who do you want to give up? Are you volunteering to walk into the population reduction booth, otherwise known as voting for Obama? Yeah, they should. The lever for Obama should have been hooked to a trap door. Population. I mean, if you think of people as just things you count, but that's the problem in general with empiricism.
Hey, you know what?
Commodities, things that you can accumulate, things that you can steal, things that you can pull out of the earth. That is not technology. That is not science. That is not what sustains humanity. What sustains people is knowledge of principles of the universe that enable us to develop methods of what we call technology. A relatively new concept, even though it's been applied for tens of thousands of years. The concept of what's the difference between one machine that allows you to accomplish a certain amount of labor, and the machine that will enable you to accomplish more. Directly is, productivity, right? If you, for example, this is a simple one. If you have a shovel, there's a certain amount of dirt you can move with the shovel in 8 hours of work. If you have a steam shovel or a backhoe, you can move hundreds of times more, thousands of times more in 8 hours because you have the machinery to do it. But think about the difference of what's required to have use the machinery. A shovel, well, you know, you find
Set of
some.
gloves.
Hmm?
Set of gloves.
Oh, you mean? Oh,
For the
yeah.
shovel, you need a set of gloves.
Yeah. Well, you have to make the shovel,
That is true.
but still,
It's a lot easier to make a shovel
yeah,
than backhoe.
yeah, a backhoe or steam shovel. It requires a lot of work. Now, this brings me to two things I want to talk about. LaRouche often spoke about the worldwide cup of coffee. And I think Adam Smith talked about the worldwide coat or something similar to that, about how to actually figure out that, well, in the one case, it was about how much it cost. All right. I think LaRouche's idea was more how much human labor and activity is required to produce a cup of coffee at a certain availability. In other words, if you think about your cup of coffee, which is a lot more expensive than it was when LaRouche was talking about it. You've heard the expression, that and 50 cents will get you a cup of coffee? No, not anymore. But anyway, the coffee, coffee beans, water. Let's just stick with that for now. Coffee beans, water. The water comes from a complete water management system, which is a function of a nation state. Right off the bat, right? It's a water utility that provides you with the water. Now, you've got to brew the coffee. You've got to heat the water. You have the electrical infrastructure that enables you to get the electrical current in there to percolate or otherwise brew your coffee. So that requires a massive amount of infrastructure. The styrofoam that holds the cup or paper, that had to be manufactured. There's a factory involved in that. And you can continue. I mean, how did the coffee get here? I mean, assuming it was grown in Africa or Colombia, then that means that it was transported thousands of miles so that it could be brought to your favorite coffee place or to your home so that you could grind it using that electrical grid, using a machine that was produced in a factory that's tied up to that electrical grid. Think about all the thousands of people involved in just the factory to make that machinery and operating those utilities and harvesting the coffee and building the ship that transported the coffee to you. I think I actually went through this once a couple of years ago. There was one particular company I focused on, but I don't remember all of that. But I mean, there was a whole history to this company that was actually founded under I think it was the Reconstruction Finance Corporation that made the styrofoam cups for coffee. So this company that produces these coffee cups was created by FDR. Okay, so it's not just a worldwide network of production. If you actually traced it out, you have to see that the cost of that coffee, the relative cost of that coffee, involves the productive network and enterprise of the entire world in order to produce that cup of coffee. All right, now just think back. Now we talked about the shovel versus the steam shovel. You apply the same concept. Think about how much more complex. Well, let's not be cavemen. Let's assume that the shovel was produced in a factory. Now that involves a fairly advanced level of technology. Now compare the factory that produces the shovel to the factory that produces the steam shovel. going to employ a lot more people. The machinery to produce the steam shovel is going to require a much higher level of skill to operate. A lot more people. But it enables you to do thousands of times more work. Then, of course, the fuel, etc. Again, now, the point I'm trying to get to is to be able to use this the most advanced technology requires more people. Now, I'll give you another example, because I've been thinking about this for a long time, but I never really checked. Now, I don't remember the exact densities. Maybe somebody here remembers. The amount of power that you can generate in a coal plant, burning coal, the energy density is, I don't know what, I can't remember what it was, but I want to compare a coal plant to a nuclear power plant.
Can you do that?
Hmm?
Is there any comparison?
Well, this is what I do remember. I think the figure was given to me at one point that in order for the coal plant to generate enough power to pay for itself, it took about 4 or 5 years. Or maybe it was 20, actually, no, that's not right. I think it was more like 20 years. It might have changed. That was an estimate from the 80s. It takes a long time to generate that much electricity. Whereas the nuclear power plant, if you operated it at its full capacity, it would take about, I think, 5 months to generate enough power to pay for the plant. And it's kind of hard to make these estimates, especially now, because of all the crazy stuff you have to do to build a power plant, especially a nuclear power plant. Like I recently read that a power plant, for one summer I worked at Virginia Electric and Power. This was in 1981. There was a proposal to build these power plants in North Anna. And we were writing a report about it. They were doing cost-benefit analyses and so forth. And I think I read that power plant is about to go online or is about to be finished. Okay, so that was 81, now it's 2016. Takes a long time, but not because of top science and technology. I think it actually would take 5 or 6 years without all these obstacles. But because of the obstacles, and instead of paying people to move in, dig the hole, build the power plant, and get it running, you have to pay them over decades because of all the obstacles in the way of it. But think about that. That's a physical measure of the efficiency of a power plant, that it would only take 4 months to generate enough power to pay for it. And I'm sure the figures have changed. Did you look it up?
What I found was just the energy density of the amount of joules contained in a ton of coal is 3.2 times 10 to the 10th.
Okay, 3.2 times 10 to the 10th joules per ton of coal. All right.
A ton of uranium contains 7.4 times 10 to the 16th.
Okay, a ton of uranium, 7.4 times 10 to the 16th. So that's what, 10,000 times more?
It's 100,000
Oh,
times more.
100,000 times more energy density from burning uranium as opposed to burning coal. Okay, so obviously that's your choice in terms of technology. You want nuclear plants. You don't want coal plants. That doesn't even get to all the other issues. Okay, and also, well, anyway, in terms of what I was talking about, more people, I looked up some information about power plants. For example, there's this one station in West Virginia, coal plant, produces 2,900 megawatts. It's got 3 units burning coal. 320 people. Another power station This is not built yet, but they're going to build it. They already have. I couldn't get the figures for the one that's there. 2 nuclear power plants that will produce 2,400 megawatts. You know, about the same as the coal plant. Well, that's the maximum capacity. 800 employees. So that's, you know, way more, you know, 2.5 times more people to operate the nuclear plant as opposed to the coal plant. So of course we stopped building nuclear plants and now we're shutting down our coal plants.
Last one built in what, the fourth one? New Hampshire?
The last nuclear plant?
Yeah, big opposition, big resistance to it. There was all kind of
You're
demonstration.
talking about Seabrook?
Seabrook, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, it's complete insanity.
Yeah.
There's only like 435 in the world now that are operating.
I mean,
The plans in the 70s would have had we would have had 1,000 power plants if they hadn't been shut down by the environmentalists and the genocidalists. But the point I'm making is it produces vastly more power. It's vastly more efficient. But it takes a lot more people. And it also takes a much higher level of skill and knowledge. I mean, some of the people at the power plants are guarding the door, right? But the ones operating the plant, you know, you need nuclear physicists there. You need engineers, technicians. It's relatively simple. I mean, relatively complex compared to burning coal. And that makes another point, is that this issue of potential relative population density is not just a question of the worldwide cup of coffee or the worldwide steam shovel or the worldwide nuclear reactor. It's also a question of the worldwide baby. And I think this really gets to the real issue here, is because we're talking about the future.
Did you say baby? Oh, what?
The reason I say baby is because these operators were babies at one point. Somebody had a conception of the future for them. Now you think about all of the activity, all of the technology, all of the human labor and human skill level that was necessary to produce that cup of coffee. Forget it. Think about the baby. What does it take to create a baby and out of this baby create a functioning citizen, a productive person? I won't go into all the history, but think about this. Think about this instead of the crude genocidal measures of value that dominate in our society today. What if we had, and this used to be intrinsic, remember in the Constitution, to promote the general welfare and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and posterity. This was natural. What do you need to produce a productive human being? Well, they have to have the food that you're growing per square kilometer. And they have to have medical care. There has to be infrastructure for this baby. There has to be an education system. Well, there has to be housing. In fact, there has to be a neighborhood. Yeah, I hate to quote Hillary Clinton, but it takes a lot more than a village to raise a child. I mean, the most important factor, I mean, all those things are like basic physical prerequisites. The most important thing is what LaRouche would call the extrauterine gestation. After the child is born, how do you acculture the child to become a human being? How do you develop and foster that child's powers to master ideas? Because that's fundamentally at the base of technology and at the base of science, you know. When we say the creative powers of the human mind, we're not just talking about the ability of an Einstein to discover special relativity or the photon or general relativity. We're also talking about the ability for other people that didn't discover it, but they have to have the capacity to rediscover it. It's basically the same capacity. It's just in the case of a genius like Einstein, or some other creative genius like Beethoven, they're doing it first before anyone else does. But those are the powers that have to be fostered to create any productive human being. All right, and that is, it's not just a function of technology, it's also a function that, I'm gonna put it this way, let's just get to the point here. The most important factor in the development of a human being is the other human beings. I mean, one of the things that we should reflect on is the fact that apart from the directed use of terrorism that we face today, we have a culture that creates tremendous amount of fuel, tremendous amount of raw material for creating terrorists. Now, whether it's used in the form of so-called Islamic fundamentalism or some nut that believes that he should shoot people because nobody will go out with him. Remember that one? Mm. Or the lunatic that was shot the people in the theater in Colorado. We have a culture that creates homicidal maniacs. And the proportion of the population that's homicidal maniacs or tolerates homicide, or I mean, whose initial reaction to 9/11, as opposed to what's going on here, what's behind this is, well, we better go bomb somebody in the Middle East. That's the kind of culture we live in. I mean, we're being told that outrageous attacks like occurred in Munich yesterday is the new normal. What kind of culture creates homicidal maniacs? Or people that make jokes about homicidal maniacs?
Sick one.
Right? This is what you do. I mean, it's been a process of degeneration. One question LaRouche used to ask: does this nation, for example, have the moral fitness to survive? Now, hello. In order to really get an idea of what LaRouche, what's really behind this idea of potential relative population density, you have to think about all these factors as a one. I mean, this is why the fight around a new economic order, a new financial system, and also the fight for a cultural renaissance, these are not separate things. The fight for a cultural renaissance, uplifting the citizenry, it's not separate from the idea of creating scientific revolutions. These are the same qualities. So as Kuznetsov would say, the key to economic progress is the increase of the rate of increase of LaRouches. We need more LaRouches. It's I think, very appropriate. I'm sure Kuznetsov figured it out that way. Oh yes, the world needs more LaRouches. Very poetical. That gets to the point very clearly. All right, so I'm going to pause here. People have questions. We can talk about that. We have until about, I think until about 7. But just to say that next week, I want to go into more exploration of this issue of the application of power to the productive process. The idea of energy flux density. Because it'll make even sharper this idea that an increase of population density, which requires an increase in population, is not only a good idea, but it's absolutely essential. We can touch upon it a little bit today, but for now I'm going to leave it at that. But that's what we're going to talk about next week. Energy flux density.
Versus
Potential.
Or work flux density.
LaRouche is referencing what is it again? The LaRouche is like the voltage.
Yeah, the LaRouche is a unit of potential relative population density.
The voltage you're applying electrical current. Everybody uses it on a daily basis. People switch it from voltage somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
How would make it the relatively recognizable and accept and useful term in people's everyday usage?
Mm-hmm.
How would
I think it starts with the physical economy. They have to teach physical economy like they used to, which was the basis of the so-called American system under, Carey, Matthew Carey, and the economists that advised people like Lincoln, and even before that, Hamilton's idea. And if they were to go back to that, this would become the subject of progress. How do you make progress? That idea of the increase of the rate of potential relative population density would be a key principle of that discussion.
Maybe you should move up so that whoever's on here can hear your questions. It might be, well, yeah.
Who's on there anyways?
I don't know.
Oh,
Rachel put them on.
hi. I just had a question about like currency and gold standard and this kind of stuff because it comes up a lot in the field. People say, yeah, I'm with you. I think we should have a gold reserve or this kind of stuff and commodities and the difference between that sort of that people associate with economics and then what you're saying about like what's the problem with that? What's the problem with the thinking around? Because that comes up a lot.
Well, as I understand it, the main problem is that the thinking of monetarism is I've got a pile of money or I have an army, therefore I'm going to use it to get what I want.
It always costs money.
As opposed to a credit system. Like you might recall the discussion about the difference between somebody who's born with a pile of money and someone who has credit. Like if you have, like for example, if you have a pile of money, yes, you can buy things. But once you run out of money, you can't buy anything. Now, if you're using the money for something productive, well, then you can create some wealth. But if you're not, you can, it will be a disaster. Waste it. As opposed to credit. But then with credit, and I mean, basically, credit. The credit means belief. That you've got people believe in you. They're willing to lend you money so that you can do something productive with it. And as long as you actively are productive with it, you can continue to get credit. You'll get more credit because the person lending you knows that you're going to produce something, and then you will be able to make a profit and pay back the loan. So as long as you're productive, as long as the investment is for something productive, then the credit will continue. All right, but that's not true of the money system. The other thing is, look at how the system operates now. Like the Federal Reserve will print money to go to financial institutions. What do? They speculate with it. They're basically gambling. So every supposed bit of profit that's generated by this gambling process is actually destroying the economy, because it's giving people who are not interested in producing anything a bigger claim to whatever is actually of real intrinsic value, because they have more money. All right, so the issue is credit versus money. Now, specifically on this issue of having a gold standard as opposed to a gold reserve standard, I think one of the problems that happened that LaRouche talked about in some of his earlier writings, the Specie Resumption Act, 1873, I believe it was, 79. It basically put the U.S. on a gold standard, which meant that the currency issued corresponded to the amount of gold you had in some Fort Knox or something. That put a real restriction on the amount of credit. Think about that. That's not productive. The point about having a gold reserve system would be that you could issue credit, but that you could make up your balance of payments in gold if you had to. But you don't need to worry about that as long as you maintain your actual physical productivity. It's just like the issue of where is the money coming from that the Federal Reserve is issuing to these speculators? They're creating it out of thin air. Okay, and it's a disaster. Now, where did the credit come for a U.S. national banking credit system? It's basically you're borrowing on the credit of the existence and the future progress of the United States. That's ultimately what it's based on. So, which really highlights the point about how the federal national bank should only issue credit for scientifically knowable, productive activity, not for speculation.
Some of it is like in Europe, or like a fiat.
We need to hear you.
So, I mean, the difference, like between the credit system and, like what some people mention, like the fiat dollar or money, they just print. Like if you just have, like if the Treasury just prints money, it's just doing what the Federal Reserve does. But if the money, is printed, all the notes are backed, by the National Bank. You have the income, any money that is made goes to the National Bank, right? I mean, maybe taxes or maybe tariffs or, just using examples from the past, when we had a national bank.
Yeah.
But I mean,
the main point is, where's the credit going?
Yeah.
You have to make sure it's going to something that's going to make the country
pay
wealthier in a physical.
It's going to pay. That loan is going to be paid off, or however you say it.
Yeah, well, even more important than paying it off, it has to make the economy more productive. That's why you have to be selective about it, right? No speculation, no gambling casinos, no marijuana dispensaries. I mean, there are plenty of private individuals.
You get solar panels now for free.
Yeah.
No money down, but it's all subsidized.
Who's it subsidized by?
Taxpayers.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
So it's not
Obama,
free.
the Solyndra thing, all of Obama's credit for solar energy and all this other green garbage. You know, it's you could say it's like throwing money in a hole, but it's more like taking food out of children's mouths.
How many
Right.
transcontinental railroads were built?
Excuse me?
How was the transcontinental railroad built? That was great, wasn't it?
I'm pretty sure it was. I don't know any details at all.
Abraham Lincoln's greenbacks.
Yeah, I was going to get to that.
That's
The greenback policy is essentially what you said about fiat money. But he understood that expansion of credit for productive enterprise is going to make the country wealthier. In other words, credit is like saying, here, take this. This gives you a claim on what's out there. And you use it and you make it more productive. You create more. Create something better. You know, increase our potential to grow food and build housing and generate power. Or make our citizens smarter. All of those things. Or, you know, help us cure diseases. If you take credit and you use it for those purposes, then it's paid for itself. And whether you pay back the loan nominally or not is kind of secondary. And the same applies to relations between other countries. I don't think the Chinese are all that worried about getting paid back for all these power plants and stuff that they're issuing credit for. The real concern has to be, are we making our business partners wealthier? Right? I mean, you can lend money to somebody. If you're a loan shark, you lend somebody money. But you're doing it because you're basically going to turn them into an income stream. Basically making them a slave. If you lend money for a productive purpose, that's a completely different idea. Even though you call both things money. But the greenback issue is real important because it came right, you know, national government. And there's a lot of people walking around that say that you can't do that. Go ahead, you were going to say.
It's kind of like the difference between Henry Potter and George Bailey.
Do you want to come up so they can?
Yeah, I mean, it's this on this question of the credit system versus the monetary system. It's the same act. A bank issues a loan and expects to get paid back. The difference is the intention. Under a monetary system, a bank makes a loan in order to get a monetary profit back. Under a credit system, bank makes a loan in order to make the society more productive, right? In a monetary system, you can make a loan to somebody for them to take a trip to Las Vegas, and maybe they'll pay you back out of their winnings, or maybe they'll pay you back out of you seizing their house. Under a credit system, the bank doesn't make a loan for you to go to Las Vegas, but makes the loan for, you know, the electrical company to buy conduits and switches and wire, so that they can then sell to people who install them and actually make the society more productive, and in the process generate enough income to pay back the loan and also, you know, make more purchases. It's a difference in intention, even though the nominal act is the same. And that's why, to get people to understand it, you have to get people to think it through. Like, that's the whole point of the Worldwide Cup of Coffee, is that you got to think through how these things are possible. It's not just that you shelled out $4 at Starbucks. Something made it possible to manufacture the coffee machine, the roaster, to transport it, to build the building that it's in, to create the paper cup. People have to think about what makes a society or human civilization function. And that's completely different from the way economics is generally taught. But, you know, it is the case. In that old movie, It's a Wonderful Life, Henry Potter was a monetarist, and George Bailey
was a credit traditional banker.
Is that what they call labor? Because it takes labor to do that, to get that done. Okay. And then you get also slave labor. You know, when you don't have to pay people nothing.
Well, that was my point when I started out. The monetary system is stealing. You're basically taking something from somebody, whether it's their labor or their house.
It's very low tech too, or no tech.
Or in the case of drugs, taking their dignity, their self-worth, their potential, could be their life.
I'm looking at on top of that. Is that why the people who get mortgages saying that, oh yeah, you can make this much, your house is not worth what? Let's say supposedly your house is gonna go from being worth $25,000 and they're gonna jack up the mortgage rate to $400,000 or $500,000. You know, good and damn well that our house is not worth $400,000 and $500,000. You know, even though that house is still in shambles. Like you just said, Kevin, you need to get it up the power and running still. You gotta have switches, gotta have electricity. Everything has to be updated and upgraded. And that means your electrical and your plumbing. You know, and besides all the other things that come with, especially if you have a old Victorian home compared to new homes that they're building now, these so-called composite economical homes.
Tar paper shacks.
Tar paper, yeah, where you got these new tar paper shacks that are, they call them row houses. You know, where you can come out your bathroom and you in the next person's living room. Okay.
Well, I remember, you know, all those houses they built on Dudley Street and up in that area, like 20 years ago.
Yeah.
You can see when they're putting them up. It's particle board.
Yeah.
We call it follow particle board.
Fall apart at the board.
I call it 2 pounds of 2 pounds of chicken.
It's a lot of
25 pounds of glue.
Yeah, glue and sawdust.
Yeah, that's what it is. But matter of
It's not a
fact,
house.
tell you what happened. Long term, I'm making a very brief story. My mother was gonna buy one of those homes. By the next 5 years, those homes, the paint was peeled. These homes, they right now, they're tribal looking. They're dreary and tribal looking. Because it's the so-called stuff because they use it today.
Yeah. Well, I want to make a point about it, and it applies to the roads too.
Thank you.
One of the things that, when LaRouche was recruiting the people in his movement in the 60s and 70s, yeah, he was talking about monetary policy and economics, but the main thing he was addressing is your mind, psychology. What is the big problem with the way people think?
They don't want.
They think in terms of objects, sense perception, right? Remember what Kevin said about the cup of coffee. You know, you see a little black liquid that tastes good and gets you all amped up, and you know that's a thing. But in order for that thing to exist, requires essentially all of human history is involved in that. This discovery of electricity, you know, agriculture, shipping, navigation, because how are you going to get the ship from Colombia or Africa to New York City or to Boston if you can't navigate? So it involves astronomy. It involves chemistry, plastics.
But
there's no but here.
Wait
a minute now.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to get this idea out here, right? Now, you got the coffee. Now think about the human being.
Mhm.
Every single person here, all of human history has led to the point where you exist. Right? Now, the thing is, what is the purpose or what is the point? I mean, some people think there is no purpose to the universe or no purpose to life. You have to think about it isn't a thing that led to you being here or anyone else. I mean, your life, there are thousands, millions of people whose lives were devoted to the potential of you being here to make it happen. Right? And all of us come from different circumstances, different cultures. You know, as somebody said about race relations in the 70s, well, you know, we might have come over on different ships, but we in the same boat now. You could have been on the Mayflower or the Amistad or the USS Liberty trying to get away from the Nazis. You're here now. Or if you climb over under a fence to get from Mexico or something. Hey, you're here now. But it's a historical process. Now the question is, you owe a lot to everybody that made it possible for you to exist. So what are you going to do? What is your responsibility? You actually can't do a whole lot for them because they're gone, most of them. The only thing you can do is give to the future. Because the ultimate meaning of a life is embodied in the future. What did that living, what did your life contribute to future generations? Are there future generations? That's really an issue. And the thing that is produced, the coffee or the shovel or the steam shovel or the nuclear power plant, it's completely a function of the human mind. The development of the human mind is the most important issue. The sacredness of human life, the developing of the potential of human life, the ability to make discoveries, everything that fosters that is necessary and good, and anything that sabotages that is evil and must be stopped. So that's really the issue we have to address with everyone. Why are you here? And it might make you feel good to complain about this, that, and the other thing, but are you putting yourself on the line to make the change that's required? And have you thought it through? Okay, I mean, all right, since we're in the Q&A, I can mention the convention, right? Now, what would you think if somebody said, oh yeah, I've discovered a cure for AIDS. All you have to do is take a drill a 10-inch hole in your skull, and then pour in some gasoline, and then light it. And if you survive that, you're all set. And then, okay, now think about the people who say, I'm voting for Trump because Hillary's bad. Or conversely, Trump is terrible. I gotta go for Hillary. I'm scared of that man. Works either way.
You're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't.
Yeah.
I'm
You
looking.
be damned.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, let's not be damned. I'll be damned if I'm going to be damned. All right, so again, ultimately, let's get to the root issue here of this potential relative population density, right? It's the people. the development of the people. What can they produce? Ultimately, that's what do they know. But think about what enables you to know something, right? Every person that's learned to have a literate conversation with another human being has learned how to discover ideas or how to recreate ideas.
Yeah, they can produce and they can reproduce.
Yeah. Now, I was reminded of this quote of Albert Einstein that imagination is more important than knowledge.
Mhm.
It's interesting. Because imagination is the potential to know something that you didn't know before.
Creative ability.
Yeah, to conceive of that which you've never seen, never heard, never experienced, but is true.
Just like faith.
Well, I would say that's the whole basis of faith is creativity. I mean, because you got to realize, all right, Einstein, for example, or Kepler's an even better example, but he made some pretty fundamental discoveries in science at the age of 26 with special relativity, etc. But to go from special relativity to general relativity, that was an agonizing 8 to 10 year struggle to figure out what was going on and how to express it and how to put it in the most clear form to convey to the world, the rest of the world. You couldn't do that unless you had the passion to make that happen. He had to want to know. Or another quote of his is, I want to know God's thoughts. The rest are details. That was his motivation. He didn't care about mathematics. He cared about truth. How's the universe constructed? That's why when everybody was oohing and ahhing about how quantum mechanics could predict the results of experiments, he was not impressed. Because the whole point of quantum mechanics is that there's no such thing as knowing what's going on. You can only calculate the probability. And ultimately, the people purveying that idea were purveying the idea that there is no fundamental reality. The only thing you can do is make a measurement of an experiment. There's no principle. And Einstein's, he's all kinds of quotes. God does not play dice with the universe. That was one of his quotes on that subject. He never gave that idea up. He also said, there's another one, like these people promoting the idea of quantum mechanics, they would say things like, well, you don't know what's going to happen until you can't talk about things that you don't measure. You can't talk, in other words, it's meaningless to discuss purpose or causality. All you can discuss is what you can measure in a laboratory. And Einstein would say, well, I like to think that the moon is there when I'm not looking at it. I mean, that's a question, It's like the one about, if a tree falls in the forest, does it make a noise? No one's there. No one's there to hear it. Does it make a noise? If I'm not observing the moon, is it there? If no one is looking at the moon, is it there? Kepler had to do a similar fight. He had to have the passion for knowledge, right? And it was faith. And in his case, it was even more. This is the way I'm going to honor God, the principle of the universe. He said, that was explicit with him because he was wanting to be a minister.
Hey, question for you. If a tree falls in the forest, can you feel it falling in the forest? By vibrations, can you feel that?
The lands on you.
If it lands on top of you, you're going to be it, don't you? Palm tree.
Well, ask yourself that question. If the tree falls and no one's there to hear it, Does it make a noise? Does it make a sound?
Can you feel the ground shake when it does fall?
Is it a physical principle, or is it just because I'm there to hear it?
Yeah, right.
All right, now here's something fun. Dennis Small addressed a audience of 200 students at the University of San Carlos in Guatemala. Or Guatemala, I don't know how to say it.
Wow.
On world events
In English, Spanish.
Mine
in
today.
Spanish. The video is up on EIR Espanol channel on YouTube.
Sweet.
So you can listen and watch
Was he there?
in Spanish.
Was he virtually there?
He was there by the wonders of technology, video conference.
He wasn't there, they could hear
They could hear him and they could see him.
him.
Right.
He was
And
there.
vice versa. It was a dialogue. It
Right.
wasn't just him blabbing like me, but it was a back and forth discussion. And they want to continue to do it on a regular basis.
That's cool.
And I looked up something. That's like the third or fourth oldest university in North or South America.
Wow.
Cool.
I guess Guatemala is North America.
No, no.
Central.
Central.
Hemisphere.
I forget where the dividing line.
Cool.
Yeah, I guess it's right there.
Is it college kids, you said? College kids?
Yeah. And professors too. I mean, Harvard was founded in 1636, I think. And this place was founded in 1676.
Wow.
So that's a pretty old institution.
What was I gonna say? Nixon came off the gold standard. Nixon did that, right?
Nixon?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, and that was something else that LaRouche forecast.
That's cool.
A lot of people that had heard what LaRouche had to say for years and years about the system, that kind of put them over the edge when that happened, as LaRouche forecast.
Let's go now and check this value.
Oh yeah, that's why it's a good basis for a currency, but not one-on-one. You have to. I mean, I should have elaborated more on that, because ultimately is not an issue if you have a productive economy, right? You have a nominal amount of something of intrinsic value like gold that you could use to make up your balance of trade with other countries. I mean, it used to be you could take your dollars or whatever to the bank and take gold out for it. But
At one point,
it's limited, severely limited now.
gold was traded for salt.
Yeah.
People traded gold for gold.
Well, think about it. The invention of paper money, it's a breakthrough. I don't know if you've ever seen these pictures of these giant shields of copper that were used as currency in some ancient cultures. I mean,
Walking around the street.
yeah. Or imagine you're a chicken farmer and you go to your friend, the sheep farmer, and say, let's see, I'll give you 10 chickens for one of those sheep. And he says, what if you only want half a sheep? What are you going to do?
Buy system.
Give them 5 chickens. It doesn't work, though. Speaking of productive activity.
Wow.
Wow. Now we're talking.
The person in the computer can't get any.
All right, it's 7:01, so
Yeah.
I think our official activity is concluded.
We're
Thank you
having
for
watermelon
participating.
now.
We will spend.
I think she was
We'll enjoy